Okay, so I'm gonna use a piece of a podcast that I was watching to kind of jump into this because I just wanna comment on it. Um, just I don't know, for the sake of those who are suffering like I was suffering at one point. Now let me just give a tiny bit of backstory. I spent about almost 10 years from the time that I was okay, when I was 18, I started to, I think, really notice um, some things happening in response to having been sexually abused. In hindsight, I know that some of what I was experiencing was spiritual in nature, but it caused me to want to seek treatment, get therapy, and part of it was that when I was seeking the reason why, rather, let me say this, there were always indicators that I didn't realize because of the sexual abuse, right? Like, usually they say that when a child is sexually abused, will you wake up, your sexuality wakes up a lot sooner, and so you start to experiment. You might, what they call you fast, but what they really should be saying is what man or what woman or what child touched that child to cause them to be fast. You're dating really young, you have a lot of partners or whatever, at an early age, when you should be single and acting like a kid. You shouldn't be in a whole bunch of romantic relationships. So anyway, point that I'm trying to make is, at some point there was a shift in my mind while I was in college that led me to really like go deeper into mental health therapy, because I just felt like something wasn't right in my mind. And that, quickly, those feelings and emotions quickly and thoughts quickly snowballed into being, being labeled major depressed, bipolar. They've said bipolar 1, bipolar 2, borderline. I was suicidal at the time. I was super depressed. I was binge drinking. I was cutting myself. I was going through a whole lot. And, that kind of led me down the rabbit hole of, I want to say, the darker side of the mental health industry, where it's the pill pushing, and though there was talk therapy and some of that was very helpful, I felt like, an overemphasis on labeling me and putting me on medication for the rest of my life, because I was told I would never get off of it. In order to be mentally, emotionally stable, I would have to take it for the rest of my life. And so I was in and out of the church at the time. And so for the most part, I would say that I was kind of lukewarm. There was a stint in college when I was very focused on pursuing God, but I fully did not understand what that meant. And so it didn't take long before I went back to the world. And so I was watching a podcast, a Ruslan podcast with John Keith, and he's a Christian rapper. And so I'm only like 15 minutes in, but they got to a point in the conversation that I had to pause the video and I start talking to myself out loud. I'd be like, but this is what I think about such and such. And so they were talking about how, and I'm going to link the video so you guys can go watch it for yourself. I didn't watch all of it, so don't come for me. I just stopped just now at 15 minutes because I wanted to talk about this briefly. And so they were talking about how immediately, Christians want to say that when a person is depressed and going through suicidal ideation, that they have a demon. And basically, I find generally the church, I find this, one of two things happens. There's an overemphasis on the need for deliverance and that somebody is demonized because they're depressed. And then there's this overemphasis that it's just your emotions doing what they do. And so, in a sense, there's an underemphasis on spirituality in terms of why people are going through things mentally in their minds. And there's an overemphasis on emotions just doing what they do. Now, I fall in, I feel like my foot is in 3 different camps. It might be more, but my thought is that we need to start viewing every reason that people arrive at a place of depression and suicidal ideation. And we cannot underemphasize spirituality in this, because we live in a fallen world. We have demons and that are literally assigned to everything. Right, I was watching this testimony. I'm gonna try to slip this in real quick, of a guy who died. He was shot and he went straight to hell. And God can't let him come back. So he's still alive telling this testimony. But he said when he was there was a demon for every single thing. So everything that you see on earth, he said there was a demon assigned to it. And so let's go back. So we know based on testimony that there's a demon assigned to everything that we experience in the earth. Right? There's a demon for lying, for gossip, for suicide, for depression. And the church wants to get away from, because I think people just get in their feelings and they want to get away from the idea that these things very well can be attached to the demonic. And so you don't get away from it just because you don't want it to be the case. You want to just think it's your feelings, or people like Christians don't want to believe that Christians could be demonized or be oppressed in any type of way, when the reality is that it is the case. Like, Jesus was delivering people who believed in him, but also I want to say he probably was delivering believers and non-believers alike from demons when he was on the earth. And it even says that he was delivering them from torments, and that includes mental torment, which includes depression and suicidal ideation and all of these things. And so in the Bible, the point is, this is my stance overall. Now that God has restored my mind, the reality for me is that depression is real, right? Sadness is real. Grief is real. There's circumstantial depression and circumstantial sadness that we experience because we go through things, right? But their point on here was to talk about, oh, these people must not have read the Bible, because we see this in the Bible. They talked about Elijah, but they I don't think they talked about Jonah. In the section that I saw, they didn't talk about Jonah. And Jonah was a prophet. He was supposed to go to Nineveh, but instead he went on a ship to Tarshish. God had to bring a storm against the ship and cause them to throw Jonah overboard. He puts him in the belly of a fish for three days, 3 nights, and then he gets it, spews him up, and he goes to Nineveh, preaches, and the people repent. And then he's really angry, and he's angry to the point of death, because it seemed to me that Jonah didn't want God to relent and deliver the people. But God said, I don't, we don't know that he doesn't want anybody to perish. So if a prophet goes and the people turn, God is going to relent, and he's not going to be angry, and he's not going to bring what he said he's going to bring. But Jonah was still angry, and he wanted to die. And so we see this as a circumstantial moment where you could say he was suicidal, or that he just wanted to die. He wanted to be done with the work, right? But I think that the point that I'm trying to make is it's very different for somebody to have a circumstance or an event happen in their lives, or like say it's been a couple months of something that you feel like you want to die, and you want to, you feel suicidal. It's one thing for it to be a small point in time. It's a whole other thing when you're being tormented and suffering with depression, anxiety, panic attack, suicidal ideation for 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, 20 years. That is not normal. In my humble opinion, that is not normal. And based on my own life, when I suffer for 9, 10 years, going in and out of the psych ward on all kind of psychotropic meds for 9, 10 years, that's a long time to be suffering with something. And then for people to say, oh, it can't be a demon. Yet when I received prayer, and, God just by his merciful hand touched me and changed my life, you know what I mean? And restored my mind. It's like I knew when something shifted in my mind, but didn't know what it was. And I knew it when my mind was restored again. And I can't put my finger on it. I just know that it was God, And so because I'm out on the other side, and I wholeheartedly believe it was demonic in nature, we could say that it's because of open sin, because I was in sin, off and on, but God still was merciful to me. That he even, the fact that we serve the God that has loved us from everlasting, that he would restore the mind of somebody who at the time I was acknowledging God, going to prayer, going to church because I was invited, and also because I was suffering and I wanted help, and I don't know that I thought at the time that it was demonic. I just knew that God heals, and prayer is good, so let me get prayed for. And so all I'm saying is I think that we have to consider all camps, trauma, the fact that it's circumstantial, because even I was in abusive relationships. A bad relationship can cause relationship depression. So it's another circumstantial kind of thing, right? And then we got to consider the demonic in it. And like, does this person need deliverance? Is this demonic? Is it spiritual? And then you want to also visit the bloodline. You don't know if people as far back as whenever committed suicide on your bloodline, and God says that he revisits those things on the generations, the third and the fourth generation. So you have to consider, is this circumstantial? Do we know anybody in our family that has committed suicide? If so, that plays a role. And so I just had to jump on and leave, like, put this word out there that people can consider, that everything is not what it seems. And I think it's worth discussing it in full length, because there's some comments too where people were like feeling offended. They're like, oh, I'm offended when people say that I need deliverance, blah, 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 blah. And so we know that offense is not of the Spirit of God. And so that's something to revisit. Like, why are you offended? Perhaps there is something, you know what I mean, that should be fleshed out to even know, is there more here than meets the eye? You know what I mean? And also I think that we need to be careful to not take on labels on ourselves, you know, especially as believers, because it's so rampant to just pick a label. They open the DSM, say you fit all these symptoms, this is what you are, and then we just accept it. I remember I over-identified so much with the labels they gave me because I wanted help, that like I almost would study to understand, because I saw so much of myself in it. And I feel like in so many words, I feel like I started to become more of what they were saying, and I became more unstable, you know. So labels are very important, because, you know, what is it? We have the power of life and death in our tongue. So we speak that, and then we eat the fruit of what we speak, you know. So life and death. And let's just say the label that I was given, that I was mentally ill, and that I was going to be, and I was bipolar, and I'd be that way for the rest of my life, was death spoken over me. And let's add in the medication that absolutely has side effects. A lot of that medication increases suicidal ideation and causes it to be worse. And I was worse, you know. There were moments where it seemed I stabilized, but there were other moments when I got worse because I believed the medication. And it didn't help that the symptoms attached to the label, you know, you keep telling yourself these things, you study them, you believe them, you take them on as your own identity, and then you become more of that thing. And so I experienced almost all of the symptoms of bipolar when I was in the world, you know, and when I was under that mental health care system, listening to what these doctors were saying, but God has the final word. And so based on scripture, I see that mental torment, mental illness, you know, mental illness, depression, suicidal ideation, which I now just refer to as mental health challenges, are things that Jesus delivers people from. And I think it's a process. I think it doesn't happen overnight. I experienced that in my own life. It wasn't overnight, but I know my panic attack stopped. I know that I don't have any manic experiences. I'm not depressed. I'm not living in deep darkness to where every second I want to off myself. That's not my reality anymore. So I know that what they said was not the whole truth, and that Jesus brought healing. You understand? So that's just my little tidbit. I think that we should be seeking to understand mental health in terms of all the intersections of mental health, and how people are affected in their minds by things that happen to them. And so I don't think it's ever just one thing. I don't just think it's the demonic. I think, again, trauma plays a major role. I think the bloodline and things that happen on your bloodline before you're even born plays a major role. And if you look down your family line, you might see 3, 4, 5 people even presently alive experiencing mental torment. Because I can look down my bloodline and I can see people experiencing that in my bloodline. And some of those things were brought on by major trauma that they have not been able to address. And so I think that we need to, look at the full picture, not just the corner, and not just the parts that we like, because it's uncomfortable and we don't want to feel like this might be true. I've seen myself run from these kinds of things. Like, oh, I don't want that to be true. I'm going to run from it. You know, like before, when God was trying to get me to look at and understand generational curses, I was running from it. I'm like, I don't want to read that. I don't want to know, because there was curses active, and I had to get the information, because it says my people perish for lack of knowledge. And so I'm gonna leave that here. And I want y'all to take a look at, I talk about my full story in my book, A Better Plan. Be looking out for it when it drops, because I really want people to, one, I want, first, want God to be glorified, but second, I want people to be set free and just get a different truth. You know what I mean? Get a different truth and not just hold on to what you think is true, because that's why we end up perishing, because we're so proud all the time. We don't want to be wrong. And so when we don't want to be wrong, we can't get what's right. We can't get a second opinion, or just the truth. Let's just see the truth of scripture. And so hopefully this helps and this gives you something to chew on. And drop comments in the in the comment box, whatever, and questions, Q&As. Give me your own stories. Tell me what is God doing in y'all's life, especially in the area of mental health, and what have you learned, because I really want to talk about this. I think we need to have the conversation. And all right, y'all, that's it. Shalom.